We'll move on to the last session for today, which is an interesting panel discussion on the topic, Trust is Dead, Long Live Trust. There is also a book with the similar sounding title, authored by the late Robert Phillips. That one was called, Trust Me, PR is Dead. Please join me as I invite our panelists on stage. I would like to introduce Minari Shah, Director International for Owned Content and Channels at Amazon, APAC, EU and LATAM. She started out as a journalist many moons ago. The next panelist we have today is Venkatesha Babu, Chief of Bureau and Deputy Editor of the Hindu Business Line. All these names are familiar to most of you. This panel has been put together by and will be moderated by Nandita Lakshmanan, founder and chairperson at The Practice. Panelists, may we have you on stage, please?
Thank you, and it's always great to be back on one of Reputation Today's events. Great to see a near house full, even though it's the last session. What a good session that we've just kind of concluded, at the expense of sounding a little old age, and I think being a bit conservative is really good in this age where we're just speeding ahead and sticking to our fundamentals and reinforcing those, I think, is a good idea. Pari just kind of spoke about 50 countries going in for high-stake elections this year. And high stake, not really for the common man, but for political parties and for those who are kind of aligned to politics. And I think we're living in an age where, 30 years into my career, I feel we've never seen politics come so close to business, like today. And being and to add to that and to compound that, we also have technologies that we're all talking about, artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth, dominating our conversations today. And we also have the upending of the workplace, and with hybrid work from home. So it does seem that we've covered a lot of ground in the last decade, almost kind of living a lifetime in the last 1 decade. In that context, public relations and journalism, often seen as two ends of a spectrum. And when I started my career in PR, I was told you're never going to see eye to eye with legal. Coming from a journalist family, I was also told that don't be entitled when it comes to dealing with journalism, right? Because at the time I started my career, it was earned media. And in a LinkedIn post that I saw this morning, I think, it was beautifully captured as earned media as being, taken to media and only accepted if it was newsworthy. That was the concept of earned media then. And both the professions, journalism and public relations, the foundations are trust, credibility. And the end game for both the professions is really to create awareness and, kind of inform and make society more informed. But what we are seeing today are tectonic shifts within and around our professions that is making us struggle to gain, retain, and sustain the trust of our readers, of our viewers, and our stakeholders. Why is this happening? What has changed so drastically that has accelerated our slide to a low trust environment? And to deep dive into this, I'm delighted to have Minari and Venkatesh with me today. We're going to explore the topic on trust and what can we do in PR, communications, and journalism to elevate trust and retain the sanctity of our role in society. And we're going to start with some opening remarks from Minari and Venkatesh. And after that, we will get into the discussion, and then we're going to have room for some questions, observations, and comments, which is something that both Minari and Venkatesh insist upon. And with that, Minari, would you like to start with your opening remarks?
Sure. I feel like, Parry kind of just gave us all the setup for this one, because he's already dealt in such detail with everything that's changing in media that I don't think there's much that I can really add to that. So I was thinking about this, that in this room, which is mostly different kinds of communicators, presumably more around PR and corp comms, I don't know if there are any journalists in this room, what does that really mean for this? And I thought I will just spend a moment or two to primarily focus on what does this mean in question of trust. And it feels like at this point when audiences are changing, the content is changing, the channels are changing, the media companies are changing, it's hard to know who are your audiences, what are your channels, and what are the media companies. In that world, what is it that you can really think about? And to me, the simple answer to this is perhaps one of the best and the most brilliant opportunities for the PR teams. Because this is the time to grab the opportunity. One, change what this profession and industry has often been, unfortunately and wrongly called for. We are not the spin meisters, stop being that. Be the trust holders and the brand custodians. And this is the most fantastic opportunity because I believe there is no team right now in the company which is better suited to deal with these changes than the PR and comms. We've always worked across multiple audiences, unlike marketing and advertising, which tends to be more focused on certain kinds of messaging. So that's one really big thing that I wanted to kind of build as a takeaway. And two, what that really means is at the heart of being a reputation custodian is trust. Which means that really, how do you build that sharp, controllable input, which really looks at what is it that your company wants to stand, what is the message, and then look at all the channels at your disposal, be it the media as a conversation, be it social, be it owned, be it AI, and all of these different things that will keep opening up. So to me, that really sums up what today and this world is all about.
I know that we are the panel which is keeping you away from a long day after you must have had some interesting conversations. First of all, Amit, Nandita, thank you for the opportunity. Good evening to everybody here. There has been a sea change from the time, come this April, this would be my 30th year in media. When I entered Indian Express 30 years back as a cub reporter, as a trainee reporter, I'm sure that most of you, so many faces look so young, wouldn't even recognize the 286 and 386 Intel computers which would be there. Express, at least at that point of time, was never known to invest much in technology too. I don't know whether much has changed. It hasn't changed much in media. The point I'm trying to make is there has been a humongous shift in the media landscape from the time I entered, especially over the last few decades, because the number of venues for media to reach out, information to reach out, has exploded. At last count, I think that there were some 900 plus television channel, 550 plus radio stations, millions of registered publications, close to around 600 people using the internet, 600 million people using internet in India, some 400 odd million people using WhatsApp, close to around 100 million people on Insta in India alone, about 12 to 15 million people on Twitter. So the avenues have exploded. Old traditional media like ourselves, I have been a print guy for most part of my career. Like an old dog trying to learn new tricks, I've tried to adapt over the years. But there have been a sea change. Since the avenues for dissemination have grown, there has been a surfeit of information which goes out. But there are challenges which comes with this. given the amount of information which is out there on a day-to-day basis, it's like trying to drink from a fire hose. The amount of information which comes out every minute is so much, it's almost very hard to process on what is required for you, what is relevant for you, which is where still there is a degree of value for old traditional media, old traditional titles which have been around, established themselves. I think the previous speaker highlighted some of the misinformation and disinformation and the difference between the two. So the challenge is, for trust to be earned, this happens over a period of time, depends on the track record. So there are huge challenges happening in the media landscape, newsrooms. On a daily basis, we combat on what is relevant to our readers, viewers, listeners on a continuous basis. I see that people like yourselves and the media, Nandita said that when she was starting off, she was told that never expect, journalism to be taken for granted or something to that effect, but it's a mutually symbiotic relationship. We need you folks as much as you guys need us. So for the trust factor to be continue to be relevant to across, as I said earlier, viewers, listeners, whatever the category of people, this has to be a symbiotic relationship, and I expect that there would be challenges around this which we are trying to navigate. Probably I will get into details a little bit later into our conversation. Nandita?
Thank you, and Minari, completely with you. I also feel that there's never been a better time to be in public relations and communications than today, because it's the most challenging time where we can put our skills to test and probably, like I said, maintain the sanity in the world around us. And I also agree, Venkatesh, that there is a role that, public relations and journalism can play because we are also kind of hinged on trust and credibility. So there's something, so let's explore that. And, as we were kind of watching the previous, listening to the previous discussion, I kind of wondered that, are we conflating journalism or media with apps today? And not looking at media or journalism as an institution, which is what it was, in the times that we started our profession. Also, media today has become a business, and we keep talking about success of anything or anybody around revenue and scale as revenue, right? And we also, in public relations parlance, have now started using the word ESOP, which is earned, shared, owned, paid media. And I'm just kind of thinking of the time. I was back in the 80s when one of the largest dailies kind of replaced their editorial chief with a CEO back in the 80s. And I think that was the beginning of, media houses or publications becoming businesses. Today, we just saw the news of Adani taking over majority or full stake of IANS, a leading news agency. And there are paywalls, there are subscriptions. So, Venkatesh, has your role changed from just reporting, observing, and informing to actually becoming business-minded? And how has that changed the way you look at editorial content in the newsroom?
The pressure on the revenue bit is there, much more immense than what it was even, say, a decade back. Everything today is revenue-driven, which is very unfortunate, and it puts all kinds of pressures, which also means that you would see that all news organizations today have a clutch of what I would call as quasi-journalists who cater nothing but to clickbaity kind of stuff on an ongoing basis. I'm sure that on a daily basis you receive requests for either quotes or for appearances or for any kind of information on an ongoing basis. So that is a cause for concern. That is something which all of us grapple with on a day-to-day basis. The bigger challenge is around the corporatization and the concentration of media. Unlike in the past when As you said, very relevantly, journalism was seen as an institution, a fourth pillar, if you look at it to be. Today, because of large corporates taking over even old traditional media, this has become a huge challenge. I urge all of you to be aware of this. So when you reach out and compete, when we are trying, as a standalone media house, trying to compete with established corporate houses for whom media is one more investment, they are looking at media as probably a force multiplier for some of their other businesses. Their core interest is not in media. Media is just a force multiplier for a lot of their other business interests. So communication professionals like yourself should be aware of, I'm not saying that you would have probably a decisive say on influencing the outcomes, but at least you should be aware of it. That's one part. And the second is the changes which has been happening in, all of us are aware that media rooms have been completely razed to ground, in the sense that the number of people available today are far, far lesser than what it used to be earlier. Several of media guys have transitioned to, some of you sitting over there, I think that there was a gentleman who introduced himself as a journalist. I'm sure that there are more out there. There are challenges in attracting, retaining talent in this industry. These are all issues of larger concern which the entire ecosystem needs to be worried about. It is not media alone which should be worrying. If there is no independent, free, unbiased media, then we are running into a huge challenge, both as a functioning democracy and as a country. So I hope that all of us appreciate the kind of role which, against the kind of odds which we face, we do on a daily basis. And that is where I asked you to be more aware of. I don't know whether
I think I just wanted to add, I think a very, very important point that Venkatesh made, and sometimes we tend to box ourselves in as communicators. The reality is we're also citizens of the world. And I think this point is super critical for all of us as citizens of this world. So I think the question is, how do we really differentiate between different channels of information versus what used to be traditional media? And I think a little bit of that onus is also on the media to bring that differentiation, so that, like, what's the value that a media adds to multiple sources of information today? When you're going to have these digital media which just randomly pick up tweets or Insta posts and make an article out of that, then you're not going to have companies going to try and reach out to the media, because then you might as well just post it on a social media. I think to that question, I think the big question is really, how do you build that differentiation? And yes, the commercialization of media is definitely a real thing, and I guess because everyone needs to pay salaries and everyone needs to make money, and therefore, sometimes I also wonder whether we as audiences are discerning and demanding enough. Are we looking at the right? We all complain about all of this, yet I haven't seen Bombay Times business diminish at all. It continues to thrive, it continues to do well, and so on, right? So I think the onus is on all of us to really ask this question, whether we are communicators, whether it's journalists, whether we are just people who are living in this world, that are we doing the right things? Having said all that, as communicators, sometimes we tend to index on, let's just get this out. And I think looking at, like, building stories that are really relevant and credible, and therefore need people. It doesn't matter it's a traditional media or an own media or a new age journalist. As long as we're building real, credible, honest to God stories that our audiences need, I think we would do the right things.
Great, and feeding the beast, I think, is what Pari spoke about. And, Venkatesh, we must admit that we still have a love affair with print, traditional media, because that's what a lot of our clients demand at the end of the day. So that love affair still continues. But Minari, and I don't know how many of you in the audience know Minari's background, fascinating. She was a journalist. She moved in to head Amazon's corporate communications and public relations. And then today is International Director for Channels and Content for Amazon. So Minari, owned media, right? And as an expanding owned media channel, you're quite a media czar yourself. Okay, tell us about,
Nowhere near it.
tell us about Amazon News. And what is the structure of this media channel? I think a lot of us have grappled with owned media because very few clients give us the money to invest in owned media. But how did it begin? How do you drive it? What is the structure that you
Talking of money, my budget 7 months ago, when I moved into this role, became 1/10 of my previous role, which was for a less number of countries than I do now. But yes, I think the very important part about it is, like most other companies, we've experimented with owned media in different ways and looked at it. To me, the learning in the last 6-7 months, and the most important thing is, and this is perhaps equally something that media is trying to figure out, the external, the traditional media, is it's not enough to just have great stories. Because the one biggest challenge in the world today is discoverability. Unless you have an audience for it, and unless someone's actually reading or seeing your content, it's quite useless, no matter how great a story you have. And therefore, to find that intersection between, we are very data-driven as owned media. Like my every single day goes in looking at what our audience is searching for, how is my story performing, which country has how much search traffic, and so on. And therefore then to find, and obviously it will be very easy to then give to the lowest possible easy stories, which people are looking for. Therefore, to find that intersection between that data, that what our customers look, and when I use customers, I use that in a loose sense because we look at multiple audiences, but what are people looking for from Amazon, and what are Amazon's business priorities? What is the narrative and story that we as Amazonians feel our audiences should know about? And our audiences are our customers, but they're also policymakers, they're also our vendors and partners, and of course there are our employees. Employees are always an underrated audience, as the Western world has already discovered much more. I think the Asian and the more Eastern worlds are gradually waking up to just how critical role these audiences will play. But that really is the heart of it, like finding the data, finding the stories, thinking about distribution, who is going to read the stories, and we do not do paid at all.
And how do you look at it? Do you look at it as complementary to your...
Of course it's complementary.
Or a parallel news channel for external media? How do you look at it?
Parallel or complementary, use whichever words you want, because I don't think we are ever going to be the only channel to reach our audiences. The important thing is that's not how people consume. All of us consume information and news and content in so many different places. Most of us as communicators still imbibe or use a lot of traditional media, either in the print form. Like in my case, I do still have print papers coming in the morning, and we have about 7 newspapers in the morning at home, because my husband and I are both from the old media world. So we look at those papers, but then I consume a lot of media. Interestingly, I actually search out articles which are long and which I see is interesting to read in my journey on my phone. So then I don't read it actually on the paper, I bookmark it online. So we consume that. We all look at various social media. We all perhaps have subscriptions and newsletters and so on that we subscribe to. And then we look at a whole bunch of different channels, right? So to me, if that's how people are consuming content, we as communicators need to offer content across. And therefore, of course, we talk to the media and we offer content through the media with the journalists or reporters are interested in. But then we also talk in social media. We're also very strongly present there. And we are present in owned. And like I said, I want to emphasize, we do not do paid. We only do organic amplification.
Right. Thank you for that. Now, storytelling, right? It's a buzzword. And I see that a lot in our profession as well. But storytelling in journalism and public relations is different, because while we allow ourselves the creative license, fact-based narratives are equally important, and fact-based narratives that are followed through. But we find fact-based narratives being talked about less than the buzzword that is storytelling. And within that, we have false narratives, fake news, and whatnot. So Venkatesh, in this age of false narratives, I just heard of troll farms and bot armies. How do we tell news, that is as close to the truth as possible? And what are the mechanisms that a media house has in place today to combat disinformation, misinformation, fake news, etc.?
This is something which we grapple with, as I said earlier, on a daily basis, every single day, every single hour in our newsrooms. How to separate the wheat from the chaff, news from content in general. There is so much of information which is pushed out to us on what is relevant to our audience, what is accurate, what is truthful. People come down like a ton of bricks, especially on traditional media, moment there is even the smallest deviation away from truth, and rightly so, okay? But if you look at what also sets us apart from the so many other channels and venues is precisely because of adherence to this best practices. This is a ongoing battle which we face on a daily basis. But even before I go there, let me ask a question to the audience. Ira, Lisa, Sana, Saundarya, these are some names, apart from the fact that they are obviously look like they are female names. What is the common thing which you think, anybody in the audience which connects all of this? Anybody?
LLMs?
Yeah.
LLMs?
Not exactly. Okay. If nobody has somebody was saying something over there? Not audible. Exactly. Somebody got it. These are all AI chatbots. Journalists are competing with this AI chatbots on our jobs are being lost to this AI chatbots. In the newsroom, there is a very real fear that a large part of our work is being replaced. We also in our newsrooms at Business Line use ChatGPT to generate headlines, to summarize an article which will go just online. We also use AI to some extent, but the kind of challenges which are there out there, without the kind of training budgets, without the kind of investments which are required for us to adapt, media organization, and this is not unique to us, this is true for all media. So, which is the kind of way we are competing against and fighting against in a sense. So, to your question of how do we decide what story is relevant, how do we ensure proper storytelling, how do we adhere to being truthful, to being accurate, these are all North Stars for us, which guides us. The basics haven't changed in journalism, irrespective of the delivery platforms, whether you are delivering it in print, whether radio, television, online, whether it's an app, whether you're not some, as you probably use the term, troll army or some social media handle. We are a very, very responsible organization, which is where we believe that which sets us apart and which provides a kind of value which we do.
And it makes me think, right, just, before I lose my strain of, when you spoke about news and content, I think for all of us on the other side of the fence to think, are we pushing content to media and journalists, and is that, and in effect using pestering power as against really thinking through what makes for news and using our knowledge power to engage with journalists? I think food for thought.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. Actually, an Amazon newsroom is not very different. Because we get pitched by almost every side of the business, given the number of businesses we have, for stories to run. And a lot of these are actually press releases. And we actually use data to say, is there an audience for it or not? One of my biggest tasks in the last 7 months has been to teach my team to say, no, by the way, a lot of my team is all ex-journalists across like from UK to India to Japan to Singapore.
You're reinforcing my point.
So, absolutely.
Media unfortunately hasn't been able to retain talent because of its inability to pay. People like Minari have crossed over to the dark side precisely because of this.
Dark side.
I actually have a viewpoint on this. I'll talk to you, Venkatesh, after this about this. But yes, that's precisely the point, that asking those really hard questions to our colleagues internally. So we have an editor in each country, and the editor works almost as a commissioning editor because we don't have newsrooms in that sense of a lot of people. We work with freelance writers, and luckily there are now a lot of freelance writers who do have journalistic backgrounds, to ask those hard questions and write it really like a journalist would.
I mean, I'm one of those believers who, I mean, I hope print media does not die. Okay, so, but
I hope media doesn't die, whichever form.
Journalism in its form does not die as an institution. And I think our last part, because we also want to open it out for a few questions, is how do we build these trust bridges? How do we, as public relations and journalism, how can we build these trust bridges? And as Minari rightly said, it is really an important time for us. We use the term purpose, reputation, goodwill, facts, trust, and now is the time more than ever to underscore these in our actions and the actions of the businesses, institutions, and individuals we represent. So Venkatesh, I've often heard from editors when I ask, why aren't important issues being highlighted? And they say, but this is what the reader wants, you know, and are you getting enough good stories that are credible and deep, or do you feel in your 30 years journey as a journalist that businesses and institutions are becoming more and more opaque?
Two bits to this. One, the kind of challenges which corporates themselves have had to face because of information out there, because the regulatory hurdles have gone up. Even if there is a slight misquote by somebody, you know, the stock can nosedive 20% in a single trading session. So the kind of punishment which is meted out is very high right now. So I understand where they are coming. But to your point, you know, there is this continuous pushback. We also, just like Amazon would do, we also look at what stories do well on a regular basis. We look at what our readers want. It is a delicate balancing act between what the readers want as per what the numbers are saying, vis-a-vis the editorial call on what we think also should be known. So this is a very, very delicate act which we try to keep a balance with on an ongoing basis. There is never an easy answer. I wish that I had a pat answer to this. Unfortunately, there isn't.
And with investigative business journalism on the rise, there are many platforms that are emerging. How is business journalism overall changing?
Oh, this would take quite a bit of time. But specific to the digital platforms business, several of them, you know, I've seen known during the part of my career. Several have been my colleagues. I have immense respect for what they do. But if you look at the pure play business digital platforms, several of them are one story a day. What is your reach? 40,000 subscribers, 25,000 subscribers, okay? So you have to be aware of, cognizant of what exactly is their reach, what is their purpose, and also the focus there is on sensationalizing, looking at the worst part of, you know, somebody, laying off employees, restructuring. I'm not saying those are not relevant business stories. All I'm saying is that the focus there is completely looks to be something which is always focused on the negative aspects of businesses. Specific to the changes in corporate journalism, business journalism in general, the kind of access which I used to have a couple of decades back, I really miss. There are no honest conversations. Today when I meet with senior leaders, they're so tutored. It is like, you know, I again blame people like Minari. I'm not picking on her, she's a good friend over the years, but I'm saying people like her. lot of ex-journalists have crossed over to the dark side, being onto the corporate payrolls, and they tutor them to such an extent that the answers are so parroted. There is absolutely no spontaneous interaction at all. You don't build relationships on those kind of interactions. So while I understand the penalty for them either missaying something inadvertently also, or being misquoted, the penalty is pretty high, but I think that there needs to be more open, honest conversations. People like you should enable more of that to happen, rather than severely structured kind of conversations which are very, very limiting. Every conversation need not result in a story, a soundbite, a podcast happening. It could be just you invest in relationships. A lot of that pay off over a period of time. You also need to educate the media in a sense. The businesses themselves, because several of them are very upcoming sectors. Like crypto, hardly 5 years back when I was looking to hire somebody to write on crypto, there are hardly any good writers. If you were handling crypto clients, obviously I would have expected that somebody spent some time with the journalist, that he or she doesn't have the expertise required. So all of this is a give and take process. I hope that it's much more mutually beneficial, that there is more open, honest, transparent conversations, rather than the structured, stultified, time-bound, outcome-bound. I understand the pressures you are under, because your client is looking for a bang for the buck. Believe me, my folks, my bureaus, my reporters are also equally under pressure, because every single day they have KRAs to meet, deadlines to meet. Okay? But I think that we could have a better relationship, and I hope that this is the beginning of such a new beginning.
There's a beautiful anecdote. In the recent Provoke conference, Nicholas Thompson, the CEO of Atlantic, is in conversation with the BCW head, who was formerly Google's corporate communications head, in which he explains how we break barriers between and build trust between corporates and journalists. So do watch it if you can. But Minari, before we hand it to the audience, and it says open to questions, one last question. You have a very distinct career, journalism, corporate communications, PR, and content, owned content, which is a fairly new kind of space. What is the interconnectedness that you see, and where do you see we need to draw boundaries between each?
I think always about, sorry to use this word, tell stories without bullshitting. I think a lot of times, a lot of journalists and I got along very well, because I was giving them very honest stuff and not trying to give them spiel. And I have directly said this to a lot of my PR teams: don't try to sell, it'll get caught out, you can't make it work for long. And I think that belief that a real, true story, find the audience, find the data to back it, tell that story. I think that's true across channels.
So we have a few minutes. We started late, so I hope we can borrow some time, maybe 5 minutes for the audience to ask any questions or make any observations.
So my name is Samragi Patro. I am from Manipal Institute of Communication. So my question is not from the communicator's side, but from the people who are consuming the news and the information. Nowadays, as you all discussed about misinformation, disinformation, fake news, there's this term called journalistic bias, which is very, very common. And as consumers, we are quite aware of it. And since we are aware, the more we are aware of it, we are not trusting any news. So even real news, when we are reading it, we might pass it on as misinformation or fake news. And we are missing out on those kinds of information. So as communicators, do you think that there will be a recovery of the trust from the audience side, no matter how much the communicators are trying? Will there be this bridging of the trust between the communicators and the consumers?
Bias is inherently human, okay? There is no taking away bias. As long as that bias is known, that's fine. One way for a consumer to combat this is have multiple sources from where he consumes various bits of information. So he develops a balanced perspective. I'm not saying that there isn't bias. Obviously, we are individuals, we are human beings, so we do make mistakes. So have as broad-based a consuming basket as possible so as to get more accurate reflection of the picture you would want to arrive at.
I'll just say one thing. I completely agree with him. At Amazon, we have, it's for leadership. It's not for consumer or media, etc. It says a good leader looks for ways to find things for content, for people, for information or data that will actually disconfirm their thoughts. Actively look for things that will go against what you think is the right thing. When you look to disconfirm everything that you believe or think as you take a step, you look for 10 different sources actively to not add and support what you're thinking, but to go against, you will end up with a more holistic view.
As long as you don't get stuck into echo chambers of your own,
Absolutely.
then you're fine.
Venkatesha, can I ask you a question? Earlier, say 20, 30 years ago, there used to be a kind of a trust between journalists and PR professionals. That relationship used to be pretty strong. Do you see an erosion there, or do you see any change happening? Because you've been in journalism now consistently over the last 30 years, as you said. I think I've known you for all these 30 years as well. So do you see a shift or a change happening there?
The number of agencies which we deal with now, the number of professionals has grown exponentially. It is almost, it is not just because the hair on my head has gone off and my memory is also gone that I don't remember a lot of people. It is also because the number of, on an average, on a daily basis, I try and deal with 30 to 35 different people, either in calls or in person. It's humanly impossible. But to your specific question of trust, this is something which you build over a period of time. And this is a two-way street. This is true for journalists as well as for the communication professional. Both of them need to invest time in building that relationship. Okay? As long as we do that, and as Minari said, as long as both sides don't bullshit each other, there is clarity in terms of where they stand from. Most often than not, we might not agree with each other. But as long as we understand where we stand, then I think that it's a perfectly working relationship. The best I always hope for is a good professional working relationship.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think, any other questions? I think we're out of time. Well, thank you so much. And I do feel that, as again quoting Nicholas Thompson, he said, we're living in the abyss of low trust internet. I think we created a monster. And I hope, 30 years down the line, we're not going to be regretting, not having been a little more cautious about AI and all the new technologies that we're touting and making to the headlines. There is a responsibility for us, all of us, and I would like to reinforce that building trust is actually a marathon. It's not a sprint. And let us distinguish between journalism as an institution and public relations. Why not? Journalism and public relations as institutions and not merely as businesses for scale. Thank you very much for being a wonderful audience. Thank you.